at Stanford University.
We're really lucky to have Dalton Caldwell here from Y Combinator, probably the world's maybe most well-known incubator. I think I just saw that it's less than 3% now of your acceptance rate for each class. They take 85 companies, I believe, in this most recent class, and Dalton Caldwell is a partner there, so he, I assume, has his hands on all different pieces of the company, which we'll be hearing about today. In addition, he's a music expert, started a company called iMeme, I think I'm saying that? iMeme. That was one of the first and largest music streaming companies that had their revenue come from online advertising, and in 2009 was purchased by MySpace. In addition, we read some blog posts. I hope everyone is up to date on that, on Bitcoin, on Pinterest versus Snapchat, and also on 3D printing, which maybe we'll hear a little bit more about today. So please join me in welcoming Dalton.
Yeah, this is fun because it's a small enough room that it's manageable. I don't feel like I'm like shouting at a crowd. So yeah, and I think it's collaborative too. Like people ask questions during the thing, right? Like that'll happen. Good. So quickly about me, I'm a Stanford grad, so it's nice to be back on campus. I was an undergrad. I did symbolic systems, and also had enough credits to get a psych degree too. Why not? I started my first company right out of school, and it wasn't really on purpose. I didn't say, oh, I really want to start a company. There was just a series of coincidences that happened in life such that I ended up starting a company rather than taking a job somewhere. And it's convenient when you look back in time to tell a narrative that you meant to do that or that like it was like destined. But I'm not convinced that's the case. Like definitely not in my story, and I think a lot of the stories too, right? People like to put a spin on why things happened the way they did. But for a variety of reasons, I ended up starting a company in the doldrums of the post.com boom when it was like really not a cool thing to do. And there really was no angel investment. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but somehow, somehow it happened. And so that company was called iMeme, which lasted quite a few years. That was almost my entire 20s. I was a startup CEO, and that got to be quite large. I raised about $70 million for that. And the majority of that went into content costs. I wish I could tell you that money went into like productive uses, but much like many of the content companies that you see now, your SoundClouds or your Spotifys, it takes a lot of capital to run a business like that, and it tends to go into content costs. So I learned all about that. And then for my second company, it was called Mixed Media Labs, and we worked on a few things, including app.net. And I think one of the few folks that have raised from both Sequoia and Andreessen Horowitz, so I know what both of those firms are like. And my first company, the thing I'm most proud of is not like that we raised money, because that's often like a negative signal that you did well, right? Of the YC partners, I think I raised more than everyone else, but I, by no stretch of the imagination, had the most successful company. So, so that's not something to necessarily be impressed by. But I was proud that we did have a real company, and we got it to a $24 million annual run rate. It was big. The most exciting thing was we had widgets that were all over the internet, and in a given month we would see 10% of all the IP addresses on the internet. So it like felt really cool to have made something that touches that many people, and so that's the thing that I was most proud of. But anyway, that's probably all I'm going to talk about me personally, unless you ask more questions. So I'll tell you a little bit about YC just to start with. We funded about 850 startups, and this number changes. We just funded our last batch. We just did interviews last week, so this number obviously changes quite a bit. And the prior batch, it was 114, and so yeah, it's gotten a little bit bigger there. Here's some of our companies. Zenefits is in the news today, which is cool, and I think what's most impressive about them to me is that they were in YC exactly 2 years ago, right? They were winter 13, and so to go from like someone that was in YC that would have just finished and done demo day like 6 weeks ago to where they are now, I think that's pretty cool. And so it's good to see of these companies. They're not just ones from like 10 years ago. Many of these are fairly recent, and I anticipate there'll be more like Zenefits. If you take the valuation across the companies, right now that adds up to over 40 billion, which is again maybe a bit of a vanity metric, but I think it shows the impact of how many companies there are. this is a little bit out of date, but yeah, about 33 companies have a valuation over 100 million, and 5 are valued over $1 billion. And I don't think that includes Zenefits. The other thing that I think is interesting and not obvious from the outside about YC, if you haven't done it before, is the size of the network and the extent to which other folks that are YC alums will be cool to you. And if you want to sell, like if they could potentially be customers of your product, they'll give you real feedback. If there's some way that you need a favor from them on something, they're usually pretty good. When you're in the batch, it's okay to email a number of different folks that are YC alums and ask for help, and you usually get it. And I actually think that's one of the biggest reasons to do it, regardless of capital, is having access to that kind of network is pretty helpful. Again, in the Zenefits case, because they're top of mind, their first customers, of course, were other people in their batch. Right? There's no better group of people to be your first customers and to give you feedback and to be both brutally honest and forgiving, right? Because they're going through the same thing that you are. And the same thing happened with Stripe, is the first customers of Stripe were other people in the batch, and then kind of radiated outwards from the alumni network. And it's pretty cool to see that in action, and that's definitely something that, as it gets bigger, seems to be even more valuable. There's quite a few countries represented in YC. It is more global than folks realize. So these are companies represented just from the Winter 15 batch. Like, I'm not cherry picking this from all time. This is just the last batch. And yeah, there's
companies moved out from there, or just founders who were born in those places?
I believe they applied. That's where they were living when they applied. And they can move back after YC's over. There's no expectation they stay in Silicon Valley. One example is there's a billing company from India specific to the India market. And yeah, they should move back to India, right? Like, there's really not a big value add for them to stay around here. Yeah. So now getting to the meat of the presentation. This is a very advanced class and group that I'm talking to. Like, I speak at a lot of universities, and sometimes I go places and people don't know anything about VC or startups or whatever, but like, man, I went to Stanford too. And so people here know quite a bit about how this ecosystem works. And so I tailor this to this specific audience. So what I want to start with is how a little bit of knowledge about this stuff can actually get you into trouble and often be worse than if you knew nothing about it at all. So let's take an example. Let's imagine you wanted to be the best runner in the world, right? You wanted to win the gold in the Olympics. And you're like, OK, I'm going to go about learning how to do this. And there's two approaches. You could go listen to the world's best Olympic athletes that have done it before, and they'll walk you through how to structure your Nike sponsorship and what to do with your staff and what to do if someone's not performing that's part of your team. There's all these things that you can learn about, and that's what someone that's super experienced and successful will teach you, right? And then conversely, you could just learn a good training schedule and try to learn how to run really well. And in my opinion, it's more likely, especially if you're just starting out, that learning how to run is probably going to pay off way more in the long term than understanding all the semantics of what you do once you're already successful. And the vast majority of education that I've seen around startups focuses on how do I raise money? How do I hire employees and that kind of stuff, which is totally cool and very relevant. I'm not going to argue that these things aren't relevant, but you can totally miss the point of this. And often when I speak to founders, all they want to talk to me about is what their cap should be and all this. And this is at colleges, right? If college students are coming up to me and talking to me about what their cap should be and how to maintain board control, that's a sign that they may be thinking about the wrong things, right? And those things are super relevant, but they are only relevant if you already have something that works and you've made something that people want. And so this is something that I've noticed quite a bit in Silicon Valley among university kids, at Stanford, because everyone knows about this stuff. It's in the air. You can't go to Phil's and sit there without hearing this stuff in the air talking about, right? So it's all around us, and so we tend to think this way and ask questions about it. But that's not necessarily the best. That's not what you should be focusing all of your mental energy on. So what is a startup anyway? What should I be focusing energy on? This is kind of a longer passage, but it's from Paul Graham's essay entitled Startups Are Growth. And kind of his point is that a startup is not this thing that you just started, like that doesn't really define it, or it's not that you raised money for it, that doesn't really define it. It's basically this thing that's supposed to grow really, really, really fast. And in my opinion, a startup that is a good startup and the founders are doing a good job is one where it grows really, really, really fast, right? Not how much money they raise, not how fancy they are, not who their investors are. Like there's all these other things that we tend to associate with success. But like you know something is good if it grows fast. And this is a very Paul Graham way to think about things, but it's clarifying. Because he was saying, what he's saying, which is right, is like if you actually grow, all that other stuff happens, right? Like you could be the worst fundraiser in the world, but if you have something that's taking off and that users love, you will figure it out and money will come to you. Even if you make every mistake in the book, you will still succeed if you continue to grow, right? This is something that's so hard in my job of seeing founders struggle and some succeed, is that like you can be the best at everything, but not be growing and fail. And you could be the worst at everything and screw everything up and hire all the wrong people and like burn too high and just like totally blow it. But if you're growing, you're gonna succeed. And that's not fair, right? That doesn't speak to what we expect a startup to be like, which is that it's fair. And somehow like if you work hard or if you raise money from the right people and you hire a good staff, you're gonna succeed. But like that's not how it works. So I wish I had some way to make that sit better, but it continues to be something frustrating to me from where I'm sitting in my job. So just to be specific, things that you probably shouldn't be worried about in the very earliest days of your money, earliest days of your company is you probably shouldn't be thinking about raising money if you don't even really know what the product is yet, you don't have any users, right? That'd be my suggestion. If you're talking about things like term sheets and liquidation preferences and board control when you like don't have a product yet or a domain name registered, probably not a great use of time. And again, hiring. This is something that's notorious in people that have a little bit of knowledge and are experienced, as opposed to people that know nothing, is they like hire immediately. They're like, oh yeah, let's get some like marketing people, let's get a salesperson. The immediate rush to hire before you have stuff figured out. So like, you'd be surprised how far you can get with just the founders. The things you should be worried about, of course, is like, does anyone actually want this thing? Are you sure? Do they really want it? Are they gonna pay you money for it? And then of course, growth. Not having growth or slow growth is what kills everything, right? Like if you continue to grow, you can paper over any other problems you have. But if you're not growing, like it's really hard to finesse your way out of the situation. And just in terms of fundraising, like again, I apologize if this is obvious, but it's good to just underscore this. But like, things don't get easier when you raise money. Let's say you pull it off and you raise a great round from a really great investor and you feel good about the terms. Like, it doesn't make you grow. If anything, you raise the stakes on yourself, and it doesn't make people want the thing you have. And again, it's actually easier to believe that you became successful by raising money, and so this is like a lie that people tell themselves and get into like bad cycles. So just unlearn this kind of stuff, right? And this is why totally green founders that are from like the middle of nowhere sometimes do better, is they don't know any of this stuff, so they haven't been trained to think this way. So like, this is one thing with folks that are really experienced like yourselves and have access to amazing resources, is like, don't overlearn on these sorts of things. And then, one other thing that we see sometimes is like what I call cargo cult startups. Do you guys know what a cargo cult is? It's basically like you put all of the window dressing of being successful, and from the outside, everything you do looks like you're doing the right things. And so you have like an executive team immediately, you have good titles, you have like all the right staff there, you have a bunch of employees, you have cool office space in the right location, you have PR, you have and it could, again, look, and to your friends and to your parents, you can look really successful. So just watch out for that, because that is usually not correlated with success. So that's enough of that part of the spiel. We can talk about that later if you want to, but this is my advice to you, this audience. I would not be saying that to someone else, but this is what I would have to say to Stanford folks that are in grad school. Okay, let's talk about the VC industry. So venture capital is a hits-based business. One cool way I've heard it described is it is black swan farming, right? Your job as a venture capitalist is to fund something that becomes a black swan. It is not to make money a lot of the time, right? It's to make sure you get those black swans. And black swans are inherently counterintuitive and like hard to expect. Like by definition, they're not something that people could predict through rational means, right? the other thing that we talk about and what I see sometimes is that great companies are exceptional. And that doesn't mean like exceptional, like they're great. It means that like they break the rules. Again, like so Zenefits, single founder. Isn't the rule you're not supposed to have more than one founder? I thought so. That's what I think the rule is. But nope, single founder, that's an exception. Right? There's not a single successful startup where there aren't like these like things where it doesn't map to what you think a successful startup is supposed to start like. And so so if you're going to be black swan farming, you have to be willing to deal in exceptions and constantly be living in this gray area where you're hoping these exceptional things that are totally unexpected happen. Right? Because if you only bet on things that are expected, you will never have exceptional things happen. Right? See, this is kind of a mindfuck. So the other thing is they're counterintuitive to the layperson. So this is, when you read blog comments that are like, why would you ever give money to this thing? It's never going to make money, right? Like, they're not wrong. Because if you're thinking about this stuff logically, if you're thinking about the way you think about your monthly budget running your own life, or like if you were a bank, yeah, this seems all really crazy here. Like, people are insane in Silicon Valley, aren't they? But that's because if you're black swan farming, you have to do counterintuitive things to generate the kind of returns that keep the business going. And like my favorite class I ever took at Stanford was about rationality. I forget what the title was, but it was a symbolic systems class. And we were talking about Daniel Kahneman and Tversky about how like we're really bad, like human brains, certain kinds of statistical things we just don't get. And people don't get power laws, right? Like they just don't. And I'm not claiming that I do either. But like things feel weird when you're dealing with power laws, where there's just a really tiny number of companies at that end. So in the VC case, if you just took like Google and Facebook and maybe like 4 or 5 other ones, they generated all the returns. Like if you had a really great VC fund during the .com era, if you were invested in that number of about a half dozen companies, you made tons of money. And if you didn't, you lost. It wasn't like all these other things. Like there's hundreds of companies, thousands of companies got funded. But if you managed to miss those black swans, you did not generate a fantastic return, right? And the same goes with founders, where they always think of like, well, they try to think of themselves in the 50th percentile, where like other people are raising money, other people have this much staff, other people have this amount of burn. But if you're in the 50th percentile, like you're right here. Don't be in the 50th percentile. Don't be like, you want to be the startup that's really not like anything else, and that isn't right in the middle of the pack of what you think other startups are doing or how you think other startups are performing. And if you look at the really exceptional startups, their growth rates are always like way in the like 99th percentile. And so you as a founder want to not fall in the trap of being in the 50th percentile, which we tend to be much more comfortable in, rather than being an outlier. And yeah, I just brought this up a second ago, but like this is what people that are commenting on blogs don't get, is that you will do your fund will do much worse if you miss the one hit, and you could fund 20 really terrible companies as long as you don't miss the black swan. And you could fund tons and tons of 2x, 3x companies, right? But if you don't get the big one, your fund returns aren't going to look great. And so this makes you have to make decisions in a very like counterintuitive way a lot of the time. In my opinion, VCs are basically specialized banks, and that's what it grew out of, where banks know how to lend money to give you a mortgage. They know how to take a small business and give cash for it. And hypothetically, if you were a startup, you could go to the bank. You could go to Wells Fargo and like fill out an application that you need 200 grand for your iPhone app. But like, that's not, they'd probably reject that loan application. And so the model evolved because there were really deep domain experts that had access to capital that felt comfortable making those kinds of crazy risks. And again, I see similarities with this in the way Hollywood works in terms of like the studios are a lot like specialized banks. And they do the same thing where they have seed stage, which is like a production company. So I see a lot of similarities with it. And it's also a hits-driven business. Like Avatar keeps the lights on, right? like they're all waiting. Everyone in Hollywood is waiting for like the things that like make all the returns. And it's okay to fund lots and lots of terrible movies that like don't return, right? That's the model. So I always like this quote. I think this is one of the guys from MGM, like Goldman. But like nobody knows anything. And he was talking about how like no matter how good you are, you can't actually predict what's going to work. And he's talking about movies, but I think it's exactly the case with startups as well, where like, yeah, no one knows. Like anyone that tells you they can like 100% know what the next big thing is like totally wrong. No matter how much experience you get, like you don't know. So you just have to like do the best you can to make an educated guess. Similarly to the way studios work in VC, capital is not equal, it's not commoditized, it's not a bank. Presumably you're getting more than just money. You're getting expertise, you're getting access to a network, all basic stuff. But I think my biggest advice on this one is how important it is to have inbound interest versus shopping something. Again, this is what I was talking about earlier. Like if you have nothing in your fundraising, like you're not gonna have a lot of leverage, right? Like you're basically trying and begging that someone will give you money. On the other hand, if you have something that's working and you have something that users like, you will have inbound interest. And that's what will give you the kind of leverage to actually do what's best for you to work with folks that could be good investors or add value, and at least on terms that are attractive to you. And so I do think like it's much better to have something, it's better to have a good script that people want to try to pick up and bid for than it just be like, you know, cold emailing people with copies of your script, right? So I would suggest that is the same case with startups. And then just on this topic, I mean, I'm not convinced that understanding how VC works actually makes you a better founder. Like you have to deal with it, and if you are successful, you need to know this stuff, right? But when I started my first company, I didn't really know this stuff, but I had an attorney who explained all this stuff to me. And it became very relevant in the later stage rounds. But if you're just trying to start your first company, you know, sometimes some of this knowledge can get in the way. And much the same way, like you're not going to learn to direct a better film because you know how the studio system works, right? Once you're a good filmmaker, you need to know how the studio system works, or your stuff's never gonna get made, right? But if you're like a film school grad, like you don't need to worry about who's running what studio. So, I'm gonna talk real quick about just YC specifically, YC's effect in the Valley. I started my first company in 2003, which predates YC quite a bit. And so I saw what happened when it came out. And what I found most interesting was that it funded people that would never, ever, ever be fundable. And I don't know if people realize this, but like that was why it was cool, is that people with very little, like very little in terms of like resume or connections, could get funded for their thing. And that was, people thought it was a joke, to be honest. They thought it was like a folly to do that because it did feel very much outside the norm. And now YC is part of the establishment, but at the time, the establishment thought it was like very wrong-headed because it would like fund people with nothing, basically. The other thing is it focused on revenue and low burn, and that was out of necessity. I think originally YC gave you 20 grand. So obviously it's kind of hard to like hire a big staff and you know, eat if that's like your entire funding. And so that kind of got baked into the entire way the firm works. And also, just this came from Paul Graham specifically, but a crispness and conciseness and plain spokenness in language and priorities. This is what we encourage our founders to do, and the way we are as well, of just kind of like cutting through the BS and trying to explain things in simple terms. Because if people don't understand what your thing is and what it does, you already lost them. Like you'll never convince anyone to fund you or buy your product if they don't even understand what it is. And so conciseness and plain language is something that we like a lot. And also the laser focus on growth. That was surprisingly refreshing at the time in my recollection. This is a photo of the first YC batch. And I think it's actually kind of fascinating because like, does this look like something that's gonna be big? Like, does this look like kind of, and so there's PG on the right, there's Sam Altman to his left, there's Aaron Schwartz to Sam's left, there's Justin Kahn, who founded Justin TV, and Twitch is what that turned into. And then there's the two founders of Reddit in the back, and there's Jessica. So like, yeah, like this was the very first batch. And people thought this was kind of like a joke at the time, that they were funding these, like, it was like summer camp is the way it was like thought of. It was like, oh, you guys are having a summer camp. That's so cute, right? But this actually worked pretty well. And so in terms of how it's changed over time, the coolest thing that I've seen is that the YC network itself has network effects, because now there's someone that's an expert in pretty much anything. We're doing more in biotech, we're doing more in science, we're doing more in healthcare, and there's more, as we have more founders that do that stuff, the range of the scale of the network is increasing, which I think is pretty handy. We also have more partners now, and we're trying to keep the partner ratio between the companies linear, right, where there's the same ratio. So even though we're getting bigger and people are like, oh, with all these companies, how do you pay attention to them? Well, the fact is we make sure we have the same amount of bandwidth per partner per company. And so I think that's personally worked pretty well. And also we have a pretty broad focus in the stuff we want to fund, as opposed to like 10 years ago where like either the type of company they're doing or how crazy it is, like who the founders are and where they're from, or again, like what their exception, maybe they're not, maybe they're an exception to the rules of what you think normal founders would be like, but like that's cool. Like we're definitely doing that, as well as geographies. That's why I showed the geography thing earlier. It's like, we don't plan to expand internationally, but I think it's great for people to come, be a part of the program, be a part of the network, and then if they want to go back to where they are, that's fine too. So that is the majority of my main, I think we're about time too. So that's the majority of my main presentation. I think it's Q&A, right? Yeah, cool. Q&A. Yes?
I'd be curious to hear, given this broad focus, then how do you think through the selection process, given how many companies apply for every single batch, increasingly more and more so as that acceptance rate goes down and down, you have to be more selective in terms of the companies you pick? Yeah, I mean, we have some expertise about selecting them, right? So like, do you want to talk about like healthcare? Like, give me an example. Well, specifically, how do you choose? Do you choose companies on a company by company basis, or do you choose based on, for example, we're going to have this many healthcare, this many internet
Yeah, definitely the former. People sometimes think we do the latter. Like, let me give you an example. Like, we don't have like a quota for Bitcoin companies, okay? Right. Like, people aren't starting Bitcoin companies anymore. Like, so we see it in applications. I don't know why. I don't have an explanation. It's not because we waved our magic wand, but the fact is, like, a lot fewer Bitcoin companies are going to get funded because a lot fewer Bitcoin companies are getting started. And so, like, we wouldn't arbitrarily have like a Bitcoin like sector where we're like, we want 5 Bitcoin companies, because then we would end up funding stuff that wasn't great. And so we completely have an open mind about what we decide to interview, and the way things shake out, I think, is actually a fascinating view of what companies' founders are starting. Like, it's like founders tell us what's interesting because they like start that company. Yeah.
Sure. So I was going to say, related to that, can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about the decision-making process ranging from the application to partners' involvement and the interview process, and how that's scored and even ranked in terms of how startups are selected?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think some of the opaqueness of it is good because you don't want people to try to game the system. But in general, like, I read lots of applications. I think last batch I read over 1,000. So I'm one of the people that reads the applications. And so again, I have a good mental model of like what the heck people are working on. And you know, there's a video, and everyone pays close attention to the video because you're looking for like making sure you understand what the heck they're working on. Like, immediately an application is not a good application if you don't understand what it is or what they do. And so if it's like littered with buzzwords and it's like, we're the next big thing and that, like that's probably like that immediately will get you less attention. And then you definitely look at the founders, you look at the founders' background, you look at how they came up with the idea, why they're working on that idea. If they've launched or not is certainly a plus. Yeah. And then things make it to interviews, and there's no, like, if you make it to interviews, it's just like, you can get in. Like, nothing follows you from the application stage to the interview stage. Like, it's like if you make it to that stage, you have an equal chance of anyone else at interviews of getting in if you make it to interviews. And again, that's 100% about just like the in-person interaction. And a ton has been written about interviews, but I do think like communication and clarity of thought and clarity of vision is definitely something you see in some of the better interviews. Again, like in the Zenefits case, like, you know, we've talked a lot about what he was like in interviews, and he knew exactly what Zenefits was and what he wanted it to be. And it was because he knew he was an insurance broker or something. Like, basically, he knew exactly what the plan was and could immediately, concisely explain what the plan was in the interview. So like, okay, that's good. You know, like that was an easy yes. Yeah.
I was going to do my question.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I thought it was interesting that y'all call your partners partners, which is the same term that VCs use. And we've heard from VCs that don't call themselves incubators, but also see themselves as like very active in advising. So could you talk about the difference between Y Combinator and an active VC that's active in leading a company, and how much of your role as a partner at Y Combinator is as a teacher or mentor versus?
Sure. I mean, the most important thing from a tactical, like the very obvious thing is we don't take board seats. So that right there is like full stop the big difference. So when you take a board member, that is a really serious relationship. That's not quite a co-founder relationship or an executive relationship, but someone that's on your board, they're like, I think you have a fiduciary responsibility as well as you take on legal liability when you join a company's board, right? You can get sued if you like join a board and they do like unethical things, right? So like that is a very tight-knit relationship. And there's only so many boards you can sit on. So if you're a VC, I think, what's the rule of thumb, like 8 to 12? I don't know, maybe they talked to us in that class. But like you have a finite amount of boards you can sit on. That is pretty important to the model. And because there's a limited amount of boards you can sit on, that's why they definitely would want a higher percentage of ownership, because it's like they're investing a lot of their time in it. In our case, we do not take board seats. We are advisors, like you can email us whenever. And usually what our role is, in the early stage, we're basically almost like, it's all one-on-one stuff. This is something people don't realize, is we usually don't do this kind of thing. It's all one-on-one meetings with us. And we just talk about the company and we'll help advise them on what to do. All of us have been founders before. And so it's very easy for me to like tell them what I would have done or when I've made that specific mistake before. And so we tend to be that kind of, we like to think of ourselves as the first person you would call if like something goes wrong. Like, again, like the way an advisor is versus a board member is almost like another member of your management team, which is really important. In terms of other stuff, there's definitely a lot of crossover. Like there's not like a full delineation about what the responsibilities are between us. But again, like with your board, your board should be meeting every month or every quarter. And so you have a very permanent relationship with that board member. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cool.
I was curious at your thoughts on the sort of opposite framework to Y Combinator, which is you focus, particularly for this stage of a company, focus more on your value and finding a market and then growth, as opposed to.
What do you mean finding the market?
So depending on if you're like a new technology or something, you are iterating on your technology until you find a particular market, a vertical, or a segment of the market.
Can you give me like an example? You mean like a new drug or something? Or?
Let's say it is a new microprocessor that could be focused on either big banks or it could be focused on tech, depending on what like their actual need and value is. So focusing on the value proposition, and then once you find that, then focusing on growth.
Yeah, I mean, we fund we funded like 2 nuclear energy companies last summer, one doing fusion, one doing fission. So obviously they can't go out and say how many customers they have or like how many megawatts they're producing. But I do think that being very rigorous in milestones, basically creating your KPI, like creating the thing you're tracking to know that you're growing or that you're succeeding, and then mercilessly holding yourself to that is pretty important. Because usually what happens in these skunkwork projects is like things go over by a year or 2 and way over budget. And so like for those types of companies, we have several medical device companies. And again, they can't be like, oh, we'll put this in a few humans. You can't do that pre-FDA approval. But I still think the rigorousness of trying to like track your progress and being really brutally honest with yourself and your team about tracking that progress versus, oh yeah, we just got some guys, they're really smart, they're gonna go in the lab and like, I personally think that having that rigorousness is still a huge benefit, even if it is like something that you can't have the obvious revenue or user growth metrics on.
So I guess the opposite, I'm just playing devil's advocate, is that you can essentially pay for growth and get false indicators, whether you're doing growth hacks of you can get to the next level if you pass this on to a bunch of other users, or you just have really high acquisition costs, and thus you're getting actually really false indications that
the viral stuff never scales though. That always tanks. Like you can look like no one pulls off growth hacks that actually stick. Like they're called growth hacks, right? So in the first case of like cooking your books, so to speak, that always catches up to you, right? Like eventually you'll see it on the charts. And in the case of like having just like a bad business, that does happen sometimes. And like Amazon itself probably should have died and still kind of has bad margins, if not negative margins. Like they're still doing the example of like really high customer acquisition costs and like hoping they wash out. And there's lots of companies that get big, you know, like Webvan or something, where like the economics just didn't work out. And so that's like a founder decision to make, is like how aggressive you want to be as a founder with like, do you feel comfortable by having kind of crappy margins to get big that you will be able to make it up at scale? Like, and it's good to at least have a plan about how once you have enormous scale, you will be able to squeeze out margin, rather than be like, oh yeah, we have negative margins and we're just going to keep raising money, right? That's not great. So in the latter case, like growth hacks catch up to you, but like sometimes, like Jeff Bezos would say, it was totally, like what he did was a really good idea, so you should do it too. So I think that's up to the founder, what their stomach is for having negative margins while they're trying to grow.
So if I wanted to build a community or accelerator to rival YC, it seems like the exact same plan wouldn't work this time. So where do you think the weaknesses are? Like if someone wanted to come and compete, if you left YC and you started your own?
You know, I haven't really thought about the defensible aspects of it, but like there are, I think, 5,000 accelerators worldwide. Like you can't like throw a rock without hitting an accelerator. So like, I don't know, like clearly there's some aspect of this that has made it continue to produce good companies and make founders want to do it. Because you're exactly right. Like the idea you're having is the one that like thousands of people clearly had over the past decade as they're starting like YC for insert company name here, or YC for industry name here. But at the end of the day, like it still seemed like none of that has seemed to really take off in the same way.
Well, sure. I mean, it's clear that nothing else is working. I mean, that's what I'm asking. But
well, maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe like there's big hits coming. I don't know.
So it just doesn't seem like YC is just unassailable, right? Like you must have something that you guys are. I mean, you're not on vacation. You're all working very hard and trying to overcome problems every day. Like I'm just kind of curious over the next phase, like what might those weaknesses be that you have to address?
Again, like I think that the network effects are what makes it more powerful than any one person or any one partner there. And it would have to be that somehow the like value of the network or the folks that were in it started to like become less valuable. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like I don't think it's tied to folks individually, and that what makes it, it's kind of like, let's talk about universities. Like, okay, like why is Stanford good? Why is it good to have a Stanford degree? I don't know, people have heard of it, right? And like you presume they still have good professors here. It's not the same professors, they turn over. The president of Stanford turns over, right? All these people turn over, and like, I'm sure parts of it are less good than others, but like there's something about the brand and the fact that like once you go to a place, you tend to identify with it, that I do think lives on. So like, again, like maybe there will be other ways to compete with it and have a model, but I think PG's original thing, which I thought was crazy at the time, was he thought there could be a lot more startups. Like, he wrote a blog post about this, but he was like, I think there could be way more startups if people knew how to start them. And so he actually was trying to grow the market. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not that this is a zero-sum game where like, here's how many companies there are, we want to fund like the highest percentage we can of the companies. His thesis for starting YC was that if you actually like gave people these tools and tried to like help them out that wouldn't have access to capital otherwise, you would actually be growing the market. And I'm now kind of convinced of that. Like, there's a lot of reasons why Airbnb should have shut down and would have run out of money. Like, there's companies that I don't think would have existed if they wouldn't have done YC that are pretty good companies. So that's my other counterpoint to the idea that this is like a zero-sum game, and that there certainly could be big stuff started, and we could still be fine too. Like, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So you're talking a little bit about the brand, which it seems clear YC's brand is incredible. Why just do seed rounds? So, I mean, I imagine a lot of companies would actually look to you guys if you took Series A or even Series B. Is there any thought to expanding what YC does?
Yeah, possibly. I think that like the issue is we don't take board seats, and I don't think that's going to change. So like, also we aren't VCs. Like, you guys have been seeing VCs talk. Some of you may be VC. Like, do I strike you as a VC? Like none of us are, we don't, I'm not sure we would be very good VCs at leading.
It's the same kind of thing.
You can hire people, I get. We can hire VCs to like work for us, right? But like, it is different. Like our job is to be super optimistic and to be really helpful to founders and to like help. Like we love the story that there's someone and they're struggling and that they have like a lame idea and they pivot and they like do great. Like you know that startup Magic? Like that was my like last batch. I was their main dude, and they were like doing something else. They were doing this blood pressure thing, and to like work, they were like, oh, it's not working, and to like have all these calls with them, and then to see them like do this really cool thing that everyone got excited about was like so awesome for me. And that's different. Like if I were like a board member of theirs, my relationship with them, I think would have been pretty different. And I would be like, man, why did I fund this blood pressure thing? Like I think I would have had a very different mentality in how I approached it. So again, to directly address what you're saying, like maybe I just think that what our business has been historically is different than what a board member that you're accountable to and that could fire you. That's just a different relationship than what our relationship has been with founders, and I wouldn't want to mess that part up. Plus, like, there's a really good ecosystem out there. Like, sometimes, like if a company tries to compete on every front, like that's bad for the company, right? And like, there's lots of really good investors, and they're competing, and there's lots of money. Like, does the market really even need that? I'm not convinced. Yeah.
I'll ask quick while I have it. So it seems like one of the downsides of an incubator is that maybe there's some decisions that you kind of pawn off onto other people. And so with the support that you get through an incubator, you don't actually have to learn the lessons yourself. Do you find that that's a downside that you've seen from some companies going through incubators? Maybe not even YC in particular, but maybe other incubators you've seen?
I think you learn, everyone screws up. Everyone thinks they know everything. I don't know, like I'm not convinced that you will like avoid the lessons yourself by having good advisors. Hopefully you will course correct faster. I think like, hopefully someone will be like, hey, you're messing up, or like, hey, you're not growing, or hey, like, I think having a tighter feedback loop is helpful. And so if you didn't have that, you could probably go on being in denial for a longer time. But I can't think of many cases where someone like totally avoided all bad stuff and never learned hard lessons. I mean, and then address the second part of your question. I think the toughest thing that the early stage folks face is like just getting advisors or investors of any sort, regardless of what kind of investor they are, that are like a total waste of time and like add negative value. Like I think that's the mistake folks make, is they end up like finding an investor or like some like accelerator, or like whatever, and like it actually ends up like adding negative value to their company, and that kind of bums me out when people do that. Yeah.
So we can distinguish between like companies that have an amazing technology and that are trying to find like a market fit, and between the ones that sort of use this other process, which is like identifying a need first and then try to build a technology that will solve the problem. So have you noticed in those different batches some differences in like success rates between those two types of companies?
Yeah, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but anecdotally, I would suggest that if the founder is a domain expert in the field, they can take way more of a flyer on doing customer validation. Like again, sorry, I keep bringing up benefits, but like he knew what he wanted to build because he was an expert. So he didn't need to do a lot of like exploratory stuff about what it needed to be. He knew exactly day one what he was going to build because he knew it well. On the other hand, if you're a founder that may not know like what the application of your thing is, or it's like very vague, you have to spend a lot more time doing customer validation and trying to find a market. And so I think the biggest predictor of like how likely someone will like nail product market fit on their first try is going to be that they have tons of relevant experience in their field they're in, and they're building something for themselves. Like maybe they worked in an ad firm and they're building some ad tech thing that they knew they would have used at their last job, right? Like those are the things that those people tend to stick product market fit pretty fast in a way that like folks that haven't had as much work experience. Yeah, so that's my best anecdotal evidence of that. Yeah.
So you're growing your network by, I guess, having startups from India, Denmark, Switzerland, and so on. I'm curious, do you actually plan to have like offices perhaps in China to focus on that?
I don't know. I don't think so. Because then, like, that would be one of the things that I think would be less great is if we like diluted the brand. If doesn't Stanford have a bunch of weird like extension campuses in foreign countries, right? Like, what's an example of one like really random one? But like people, no, but like there's some good extension campuses. But what I'm trying to say is that like who's going to staff that? We would want to bring our actual good people there. Otherwise, even the founders will know that they're getting like not the real thing, right? But if you were to do something like that, you would want to relocate staff, in my opinion. And we have no current plans to do that. Okay. And one thing that is good about the current model is that, say you're a founder, just where your founder's heading, ignore YC for a second. If you're in one of those countries and you have no connections and you come here and you do YC and you have access to this pool of capital in Silicon Valley, that is awesome, right? Like there's a very robust network of angel investors and Series A investors and all, banks and like all these services you need are here. And so if you can be in that place, come here, get access to like a really good network, and then even go back and have some kind of link, that's pretty good for you. Whereas if you set up shop in one of those countries, you have to like you have to nurture an entire ecosystem that's already really strong here. So I think that's another upside for some of our startups that are from Europe or whatnot that have come here, is they all appreciate the fact they have access to this market to raise money in. Yeah.
Does the same apply, say, to Chicago, Boston, Austin?
Sometimes. I could tell you that angel investment terms, well, it's so easy for them. Like, it's much easier for us to run our thing here, and then you're not getting like the like B team, right? Like you're doing YC, which is the real exact program that everyone else does. And so I think the current way we're doing it works pretty well, right? And again, if people want to move back to their market, that's totally fine, right? There's no expectation that folks stay here. Yeah. Yep.
I think we'll kind of touch on that, but do we have any like big focus of YC right now, or like where do you see YC in 5 years or something? Just looking forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't have a crisp roadmap. The most important things that we do now is like not blow it. Like, think about it. There's all these things we could come up with of ideas like, oh, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? But they could actually get us off of what we're actually good at, right? Like, it seems like we're pretty good at like funding founders at a very early stage that end up creating big companies at some date, right? Like that's happened enough times, and if you do the math, like it seems to work out, that like historically we've been pretty good at that. And so anything we do that could jeopardize that working is like a terrible idea. And so that's what we've been most focused on, is like trying to make sure that like the thing that we do really well continues to be going well, and that any efforts that we make tie into that. And so where I anticipate being in 5 years is we'll probably continue to grow the batch size. I don't know what the number will be, because there's still good stuff to fund, and we've kept our ratio pretty well. And maybe there's more ancillary stuff that we do for the companies, but at its core, it should still look a whole lot like it looks now. Like, I'd be pretty disappointed if it like morphed into something wildly different. Yeah. Yep.
What's maybe a piece of advice or two that you find yourself giving a lot?
Oh man. I mean, look, this is all really obvious stuff. So sometimes people are disappointed to hear me talk because I just say stuff that's like obvious. So like maybe I'm doing that here. But it's like, hey, keep your burn low. Because we've all, like if your burn's higher, like keep your burn low. Because everyone has these stories they tell themselves. Well, we need another engineer. Like everyone has these reasons they think it's okay to like start to up their burn. But then it gets really scary when you're like, have 6 months of cash. Actually, soon. This will tie into our exercise, which I think it's about time for. But that's an obvious one. The other one is also reminding people that fundraising isn't a success, and that's a double-sided piece of advice, because sometimes people struggle to fundraise. That doesn't mean they're a failure, right? Like, maybe everyone else is raising money and I'm not. That's okay. That doesn't mean, like, that has nothing to do with how likely you are to like be really successful. Like, we always talk about this, but like Airbnb and Dropbox struggled to raise money. Zenefits was not a hot deal at demo day. They did okay, they raised some money, but that was not one of these like I don't know if you saw Sam tweeted today the article about, it was reviewing that demo day that Zenefits was in, and they were like, there are no big, like I saw 0 good companies today, there's nothing that's ever gonna be big. Like, so Sam like tweeted out a link to that article from the day. And again, like I'm not trying to hype Zenefits, I'm just like no one saw it. Like no one that was there would have picked that that would ever be a thing. So fundraising is not equal to success on that side. On the other side, just because you raised a hot round, you feel really cool and everyone's like sending you emails and like wealth advisors sending you emails and people want to fly you out to parties and inviting you to speak, you know, don't get confused and think that means that your startup worked, right? Like it didn't. It just means that right now you're hot and that changes and then what have you got? So I say that a lot. Like I said, on both sides of it. I, you know, as a founder, I had to say that to myself all the time. You have to remind yourself those things all the time.
So I want to give Dalton a round of applause.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.